Mitch Tischler joins us now from the Beltway Football Podcast. You see him on Monumental Sports all the time. Dude, how fired up are you for football?
I can't wait. I mean, last week, seeing some of the other teams starting to report, it just gets the juices flowing, and we're sitting here, and it's Monday at 11 a.m. We got at this time in 48 hours, we're going to be watching live football on a football field. It's pretty good to see.
Yeah, I'm here for it, dude.
I'm just looking for the energy. You know, we watched a lot of practices, Mitch. You remember we were down in Richmond, and I was like, I thought people said that this was intense. I said, this is not intense. What are you expecting this year compared to what we had seen over the last 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, listen, whenever there's a new coach, there's excitement around the team, and that's happened, far too many times in far too short a period here in Washington. But I do think that the energy that this coaching staff is bringing is going to be a welcome wake-up call. I mean, folks were excited about Eric Bieniemy last year, but that was just kind of one dude in a sea of guys who were a little more reserved as far as the coaches went. I think you're looking at kind of the Dan Quinn effect across the coaching staff, and that's what the people that he brought in and the guys that were being held over, you're seeing an excitement level. We see that Cliff Kingsbury's a pretty reserved dude. People love to say California cool, whatever word they want to use for it. But when you see him, in those bag drills, and he's the guy that's blowing the whistle and waving his arms and getting guys up and running, I think you see kind of that enthusiasm and that zest for football kind of permeating the entire team.
Yeah, I think it's there's an undeniable sense of energy. That stuff is awesome, but it's remember when Mike McCarthy, the Cowboys coach, broke the watermelon in the you can get a pop off of enthusiasm and motivation and energy, but eventually you got to just have players and win games. Like you can't go week after week after week of a 4-month season and survive on energy, right? You got to have players. How do you think this team stacks up?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Ron Rivera was throwing rocks in the locker room. Remember, that's always a tactic that coaches use, and but I do think that's important that if you set the bar high to start, then you give yourself something to work off of. You're not starting from a low energy perspective. Listen, when you look at this team and kind of how it's going to fare this year, I think you have to be a little realistic about the holes that were on this roster and the amount of turnover with the new coaching staff that's coming in. I think that there's an opportunity, but I think there's a ton of question marks that you have to be realistic about. And it starts kind of at the tackle positions. It goes to the defensive side with the corners, and then also to the coaching staff as a whole, because the Cowboys defense was very good last year with Joe Witt and Dan Quinn and created a lot of turnovers and did a lot of good things. How's Dan Quinn going to step back into the head coaching role? Is he going to be able to adjust? Cliff Kingsbury was out of the NFL last year. How's he going to be able to step back in? What's that offense going to look like? And, oh, yeah, by the way, they have a rookie quarterback who I am very excited about, but you can't sit here and say that you know what he's going to be once we get to the regular season. So I think that part of the excitement of this is the energy that those guys bring in, and they're kind of starting them or trying to start them at a elevated pace and get them going. And it's not walk before you run. They're getting going running.
Well, since day one, they talked about competition and all that and the energy and, you have to compete. I look at last year, Eric was here, but a lot of the other coaches did not agree with the way he wanted to do things. I think everybody on this staff, as you said, are chosen by Dan Quinn, and they act just like him. What about the players that didn't want to work last year? They going to work this year?
I mean, that's a big question mark, but I think you also have to look at the number of players that were turned over from last year to this year, and it's been obviously a pretty astounding number. So I would think that they probably got rid of a couple bad eggs in there. I'm not going to point out directly who I think some of those people were, but I think that you've heard from this coaching staff and from the players their excitement about the talk of collaboration and being open-minded. And as much as I think that it's a little bit of coach speak and player speak in a period of the season when there should be excitement about this, I also think it's them voicing some frustrations and some change that they're seeing from year to year, because I know from talking to some folks that there was confusion with the type of coaching that they were getting last year at different times, being told to do different things on the practice field than what they were seeing in the film room, and then being told on the game field, different things that they were being told on the bench. And so players weren't able to go out there and play freely and play quickly and fast and instinctively because they were thinking and trying to figure out what was being expected of them. And I am hoping, and I think that this kind of Dan Quinn, Joe Witt group, Cliff Kingsbury, are going to be able to be a little bit more effective in their communication with the players in terms of telling them what they want from them and getting them to execute that when they step in between the white lines.
Talking with our boy Mitch Tischler here on the BetQL guest line. You can give him a follow at Mitch_Tischler. There's a lot of focus at left tackle to see if the rookie, if Coleman can do it. How possible do you think Wiley moving around is? Like how I think B and I have talked about this. I think Biotish at center and Cosme at right guard are locks. I would write that in marker, right? I think Allegretti at left guard is the way they plan on going. I wouldn't call it a lock, but I think that's the plan. How much variance could you see on both tackle positions?
I think a fair amount, especially as you look through the entire season. But here to start, it's going to be a competition with Cornelius Lucas and Brandon Coleman. I do think Big Luke has the early edge, and Brandon would have to really step up and play extremely well here in training camp / the preseason to get that starting nod, just because I think a little bit of Big Luke's kind of veteran experience is going to be important to have out there, especially with a rookie quarterback there. But you got to think about kind of the machinations. If Brandon Coleman is, able to step in and be your left tackle, we know Cornelius Lucas has been the backup swing tackle and can play both sides. During minicamp and OTAs, we saw Big Luke getting reps with both the first team on the left tackle and the right tackle at different points in camp. So there's certainly not kind of forgetting about the fact that Big Luke can play on both sides of the tackle position. And then the other thing I think you got to keep in mind is Trent Scott is still here on this roster, and I think it will be interesting if Andrew Wiley struggles in camp, because Trent Scott's another guy who just kind of flies under the radar and is a little bit of a,
he's big, dude.
Yeah, he's a big
he
boy.
Is a big dude. 6'6", 330 or something like that. I mean, he's a big dude, and him and Big Luke on either side as your starting tackles are two pretty big bookend tackles there. So I think that's going to be one of the most interesting places to watch, which obviously I would be saying anyway, but particularly with the possible changes that we might see or different combinations we might see. I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out here in camp.
You know what? I'm just happy to know that when they say competition, it's going to be competition, because I really believe them when they say that, because in previous years we hear about, we're going to have competition. We knew it wasn't. It wasn't nowhere close to a competition. So you put guys out there with all this testosterone and you let those guys go compete against each other, you get the best of the best.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you think about it. Last year we went into camp and I think there was like 2 or 3 battles that we weren't sure who the starters were going to be. And it might have even been less than that per se. But like going to camp this year, and there's a lot of different positions that are kind of up in the air. Obviously,
last year, nothing on the O-line was up for debate, right? I get maybe left guard.
Yeah, sort of.
That is really interesting. There weren't a whole lot of active. I mean, I guess there was the fallacy of the Howell Brissett competition, but when one guy gets all the work with the ones, that's not much of a competition. You know what I mean?
It was really tight end was the only position on offense that there was any kind of question about.
I don't even think that was the question with Logan.
Logan's health, I think, was the only. I've meant it as Logan's health was really the only. But yeah, you go into this year, and on both sides of the ball, there are questions across the board at who's going to start. I think you can do a pretty good idea of the group of players that are going to see the chunk of playing time, but to see who's going to get those opportunities with the first reps. I mean, both defensive end positions. I would say safety.
I think Armstrong's got one, but yeah, no, you're right.
Right. There's a lot of questions about who's going to be getting those number one reps, and I like the idea of, like B said, going into camp and having these guys fight it out, because under Ron and for the most part that group, they predetermined where they wanted to go with everything, and there wasn't a whole lot of changes.
I agree with that. And things were very much predetermined there, but I think we also got to. Not to be the cynic here, but there are good teams that go into camp to compete but still don't have a whole lot of questions. Like the Eagles and the Niners know pretty much who's playing
that's
they're
because
loaded.
they have the teams, the guys
Built.
that did it last year.
Right.
Who did we have in all those positions that were coming back that we go, oh, that guy should have it hands down? Maybe 2 positions?
I mean,
but they gave.
It's probably Terry,
Ron,
they
gave 20-something. They gave everybody a job.
Yeah.
But those teams that don't have competition, those teams know what these guys are capable of. Hell, the league knows what the guys are capable of.
Well, those are teams that are winning, and those are teams that are going to be competing for NFC, AFC championships and Super Bowls.
Right.
And you're right, JP.
That's what I'm saying. Like
we can
competition's dope, but it also, a lot of the questions aren't like, man, we got 2 great players here. They're trying to figure out what they've got still.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. If they would have competed, then maybe you'd have bet the cream of the crop would have came out. We had guys that were bad and playing every week. And they still didn't have competition.
Yeah. And I think, to me, that was accountability, like the lack of accountability when things continue to go wrong and there weren't changes made.
Yep.
I think, and we'll have to wait and see, right? Like everything's in such a honeymoon period, but I think that won't be the case. And I think that's a real step forward too.
Yeah, and I think it's a realistic view to look at this team, and this team isn't going to, more than likely, isn't going to go win the NFC East or get a bye in the playoffs. I mean, we're still talking in this retooling, building phase of what this franchise is and who this team is, and so I do think they're going to be better than last year, but to expect that they're going to jump up and compete and be, in the same discussions as teams like the Niners or the Eagles or, whatever other, Chiefs or whatever other great teams there are around the NFL. I think, fans and folks should have a realistic view of what this season is. And I think really doubling your win total from last year would be a pretty dang good representation of a step forward.
I think 7-8, you're happy. You're very happy, and it's about building for the future. Because inevitably when the Niners report Aiyuk ain't going to go, the story that just won't go away, have you made any new decisions? Has your opinion on trading for or not trading for Brandon Aiyuk changed in any way?
No, I mean, I've been relatively uninterested in trading for Aiyuk. Not uninterested, but I don't want to give up the assets that it's going to take to get him, plus sign him to a long-term deal. Plus, you then have Terry coming up that you're going to have to pay as well. It's a lot of money to the wide receiver position, and I do think that if Jaden Daniels hits, you can afford to spend that kind of money at the wide receiver position. But doing that right now, before you know what Jaden is, or before you know what you have at quarterback, I think is kind of getting over your skis a little bit. And then big picture, I know people seem to love Brandon Aiyuk, and I think he's a very good NFL receiver, but I'm not convinced that he's a superstar. I'm not convinced that he's that much better than what Terry McLaurin would look like if he was in an offense as efficient as the 49ers. I'm not sure that he's going to be worth the amount of money that he's ultimately going to end up getting paid at whatever point that happens. And so, quite frankly, I wasn't really that interested to start. And this offseason and the petulance and whatever else that he showed hasn't really helped any of my thinking along those lines.
Listen, he's good, though. He may be a little crazy, but he's good. But the thing about it, though, in this town, we always say what we can't pay people. Eventually, to compete with the best of the best, we're going to have to pay somebody. I don't want him either right now. I think it's too much going on. You're trying to build other stuff. But if you were in a better position, then I'll be saying go for him. Right now, no.
I think it's like Houston.
Yeah.
Last year, they got the young quarterback, tried to build. Then all of a sudden, they're like, oh, man, this kid's great. You make a major acquisition like Steph Diggs. I think we got to see what Jaden is first. And frankly, with the way the Niners have so much damn talent, they might tag the guy. And like you might be able to get him next year if you then determine he's the right guy at the right time. I also think he makes this is an unpopular opinion locally for the crowd that wants him. I think he makes way more sense going to Indy or Jacksonville. But that's neither here nor there because I don't think San Fran's trading him in the first place. Big man.
Listen, Skins Commanders fans have been patient for 30 years for winning football. you just gotta hold out and make the right move at the right time. And you got to wait till you see what you got at the quarterback position before you can quote unquote go all in. What you said about the Texans makes a ton of sense. And I think that's a great example of a team kind of doing it the right way.
You just say they've been patient for 30 years, man. That just made things seem so bleak.